Extension Agent for Virginia Cooperative Extension, based in the Rockingham County office, but I also cover Highland, Bath, and Rockridge counties. So I've been invited today to talk a little bit about home food preservation. It's one of my subjects I really enjoy teaching and answer questions on a lot. So as we go through today, if you've got questions, let me know, or we can kind of hold it to the end. And there are also lots of handouts out here to help yourself. So we're going to get started because it's a busy day today. Okay, so why do we preserve food? You know, we grow food, and there's only so much stuff that you can give away, right? Your neighbors are tired of the tomatoes, you're tired of the tomatoes. What are you going to do with them? So there are reasons we preserve food, and it is to reduce food waste. Okay, we don't want to waste it. I'm almost try this side. I think I can see better on this side. I might go back and forth. Anyhow, also you want to stop the spoilage of microorganisms because that's why food spoils. Yeast, molds, bacteria, you want to make sure you stop that. Also to stop or slow the enzymes. Okay, so you think of enzymes, you take an apple and you cut it in half, you leave it out, it turns brown. That's enzymes at work that changes the color of that. Enzymes also change the textures of our food, so that's one thing we want to stop that when we preserve food. To keep it for later use, how nice is it to go in the wintertime to your pantry and open it up and you've got things there ready to go. That's really nice. And we've noticed, we do have global food markets now. Supermarkets, we can get anything pretty much year round, but sometimes it's nice to have your own as well. Okay, so again, what causes food to spoil? It's the growth of bacteria and molds and yeast, okay? The activity of our enzymes and reactions with oxygen. So those are the things that break down our food that causes it to spoil. And food preservation stops all of that. So we're going to talk about canning first. We're going to go through all the different methods of food preservation. This is just an overview today, but to kind of get you going in the right direction. So canning started way long time ago in France. Nicolas Appert received 12,000 francs to come up with a way to keep food in glass bottles. Sounds kind of familiar, right? And so he came up with this idea of sealing food in jars and with reinforced wire, and it took years to develop this. And then Peter Durand came up with the idea of putting things in tin plate cans, so tin cans, okay? And then our good friend Louis Pasteur knew there was something that caused milk to spoil, okay? He wasn't sure what, and food to spoil. And he then demonstrated that the growth of microorganisms is what causes food to spoil, the things we can't see, but he could find them under the microscope. And then he developed the pasteurization process for milk so that we could preserve milk and keep it for longer uses. So here's some of the science behind it. Okay, some basic facts of canning, okay? You gotta start with high quality stuff. If you have junk to can, it's gonna be junk when you can it, okay? Canning does not change the quality of food. It doesn't make it always better. So you gotta start with good, high quality produce. You're gonna place your food into heated jars. You're gonna heat the food to a temperature that destroys microorganisms and enzymes that cause spoilage. So there's a reason for heating your food. The heating process, in the heating process of canning, you drive the air out of the jars, okay? And when they cool, that is when your vacuum happens, okay? So inside of a jar, there's no air in there, okay? It's just like you buy a tin can of canned food. There's no air in there. It's all been sucked out, right? So the whole process of canning, again, you heat it, it gets hot in the jar, you heat it hot enough to kill the microorganisms in the center of that jar, and then as it cools, the air comes out, it pulls the vacuum. So that's where you hear the ding. You want that ding with your lids popping, okay? So that's actually your jars seal when they're cooling. So it's important to make sure you cool them the right way too. Okay, you're gonna hear this over and over again. Only use a tested recipe. And what we mean by tested recipes These are recipes that are found in, I brought some of these books. Virginia Cooperative Extension, we have resources up here. So Easy Preserve is a book from the University of Georgia. National Center for Home Food Preservation is a website, and any of the publications has it on the back. Excellent, excellent source of information. The USDA has a home guide to canning booklets, and then the Ball Blue Book. Okay, or if you have a pressure canner, your book, you'll have recipes with that. And the reason we say tested recipes is a recipe has, say, for green beans. Okay, you pressure can green beans in pints for 20 minutes. And the reason for that is at 10 pounds pressure, if you use a weighted gauge. The reason for that is that has been tested that if you follow the process exactly, you will kill all the spores that cause botulism, because you've heated it. You want all the spores killed in the middle of that jar. You want heat penetration. So Pinterest is a wonderful thing, but stay off of it for canning. Okay, stay away from it. Stay away from some of these other websites too, because you want tested methods. You can't go out and create your own thing. I always tell people in my classes, canning is not rocket science, but if you don't do it right, you can kill somebody. Okay? So you want to make sure you follow tested recipes. Anything with a cooperative extension in it from any of the other states is also a good source too. Okay? So you're going to hear this over. It's one of the things when I teach classes, use a tested recipe. Okay, and then here's pictures of those, and I have some of these books up here today too. Okay? In publications, these are some of our, and I have all these publications plus more up here today. Okay. Okay, so follow the recipe exactly. Okay, canning is a science, or food preservation in general is a science. Prepare food as directed in the recipe. Don't improvise with the amount of ingredients. Okay, again, a tested recipe is proven to be safe. Follow the process times exactly, and also look at the size of the jar. If it says use half pints, use half pints. The consistency of the liquid as well all have an effect on the heat penetration. The denser something is, the longer you have to process it. So like meat takes a long time to process because it's very dense. You gotta kill the bacteria. Okay? All right, so because this is what we're trying to prevent. We're trying to prevent this botulism spores, Clostridium botulinum. Okay, so most yeast, molds, and some bacteria are killed with boiling water temperatures. But Clostridium botulinum is a spore former. It is not killed at boiling water. Okay, it's only killed at 240 to 260 degrees. And the only way you can get those temperatures is use a pressure canner. Okay, which increases your temperature for processing. Okay. Botulism, again, the vegetative spores produce and cause a toxin, and they actually like to live where there's no oxygen. So inside those jars, in your jars that you can, the air's been sucked out. There's no oxygen in there. So if you don't process correctly to kill those spores, they will grow, and you can't see, smell, or taste it. Okay? It is a neurotoxin that is produced. It causes paralysis and death if you don't get treatment, okay? And it's, again, primarily associated with home canned foods is where we see botulism. The biggest botulism outbreak occurred in 2015, which is not very long ago, in Ohio. It was a community. The lady canned potatoes in a boiling water bath, which is not the way to do it. She should have pressure canned them. She took those potatoes and then made potato salad and took it to a potluck. And 21 people got sick and 1 died. So it does happen, unfortunately. Okay, so the whole thing about canning is acid. Okay, so we measure the acidity of food in the pH scale, 0 to 14. 7 is neutral. Okay, we talk about high acid foods and low acid foods. So high acid foods are the things that taste sour, like lemons, oranges, tomatoes are on that scale. You know, something that's got a little acid in it. Okay, and because it has that acid in there, you can use a boiling water bath on it because the bacteria does not like acid, and so that's a preventative measure. We can also change the acidity level of foods, right? We take cucumbers and make what? Pickles, right? We take cabbage and make sauerkraut. So you're adding, it's acid being added or it's produced when fermentation or whatever. So those type of things, so we call high acid foods, have to be in a boiling water bath. Low acid foods are things like meats, vegetables, potatoes, soups, things like that. Spaghetti sauce, even if you add a lot of stuff to it, they have to be done in a pressure canner. It's the only way they can be processed. So here's examples of high acid and low acid foods, okay? Low acid you see is meats, green beans, you know, if you're just canning cabbage, not making sauerkraut, corn, squash, okay? They have to be done in a pressure canner. You could boil it all day in a boiling water bath and it would never get hot enough to kill all the botulism spores. So you have to use a pressure canner for those foods, okay? So we'll talk a little bit about equipment, okay? So a boiling water bath, again, kills most molds and yeast and most bacteria. And because of the acid being in there, the botulism spores don't like it, so they won't be around, okay? And you see an example there, use a pot. You can buy a pot, or you have a large stock pot. It works great. You don't have to have one of these. But the biggest thing to remember is you need to have space enough for 1 to 2 inches of water at the top of your jars, okay? They're taking a bath in boiling water, okay? 1 to 2 inches over the top. You also need to make sure you have some kind of rack to put on the bottom, because if your jars sit directly on the bottom, they'll crack. So you gotta have some kind of space. You can use baking racks, you can buy racks. This one has a rack in it. Has a rack in it. It's well used, you can tell. I use these a lot. So that's boiling water bath. It boils at 212 degrees, because that's where water boils at. And that's where it's going to stay all day. It's 212 degrees. It's not going to get any hotter. Okay? Yeah, so these are used for foods with acid in them or acidified foods. Okay? And again, the heat destroys the microorganisms, and the pH helps the food preserve. So that's boiling water bath. Really easy to do. So this is your traditional water bath canner. This is my new toy. It's an electric water bath canner that you just sit on the counter. It's wonderful. I love it. It's my new toy. This is my one for work. I'm gonna get one for home. Same principle, but you don't have to put it on a burner. You just plug it in and use it on your counter. So if you have a smooth top stove, something like this works really well. So, just an idea. Pressure canning, okay? That's the one I heard somebody say, oh, I don't know about pressure canning. Pressure canners, okay, I know we all have a story where somebody's grandmother's canner blew up. They're a lot safer than they used to be, and I'm not too sure grandma didn't let it boil dry or something happened, okay? Sometimes things happen. So pressure canners, again, you have to have a special pot for pressure canners. They're required for your low acid foods to kill Clostridium botulinum, and it heats foods to at least 240 to 260 degrees, okay? Which prevents everything from spoiling your food. And they look like this. You only put 2 to 3 inches of water in a pressure canner, because you want to create that steam under pressure, and that's what gets your temperatures up. You don't take a bath, just 2 to 3 inches, whatever your book says. There's different types, okay? We have what up here is called a dial gauge canner, and I brought one like this. Okay, it looks like a gas gauge. People call me and say, what kind of canner you have? Like, I don't know. Does it have a gas gauge light on top? Yeah, that's a dial gauge canner, okay? These are fine. They work by putting a weight on it, which restricts the pressure, and then the pressure builds up and you watch it, you control it with the heat of your stove, okay? One thing about these, they do need to be tested. Dial gauge canners need to be tested every year because you need to make sure they're in calibration, okay? and we do that at extended offices. This is a weighted gauge. I didn't bring the whole pot because we ran off. My husband and I have the bee supply store over here too, and we ran out of room in the truck. I couldn't bring my other pot. So this is a weighted gauge, and the way this works, this sits on here and it jiggles, and it releases pressure. And the way you control the different types of pressure is by the rings. So this is 5 pounds. Add another ring, it's 10. And another one's 15. Okay? These do not have to be tested every year. Okay? So it's whatever you like, whatever you grew up with. I grew up with this. This is what I use. My sister, I don't know, she uses this. So it's whatever you like. Okay? But you have to make sure they're pressure canners. Okay? That you want to do pressure canning in. Let's see what else I got here. Let me step back. That's my fault. Again, if you have altitude around here, I used to live on the other side of the mountain. I didn't have to worry too much about altitude, but I moved over here. I was like, we have to talk about altitude because you have to adjust for that. So if you have a weighted gauge, 0 to 1,000 feet, you use 10 pounds pressure. Over that, you're going to use 15. And the dial gauge, you can adjust it. All of the recipes on the National Food Preservation website have adjustments for altitude, and you can Google where you live to look up your altitude. It's an easy thing to do. But if you get Stuarts Draft, West Augusta, Bath County, that's one of my counties, Highland County, it's like, oh yeah, we have to adjust for altitude over there. So you usually have to adjust the pounds of pressure and the amount of time. It's not a hard thing to do, but you do need to be aware of it. Okay? Again, dial gauge canners require testing every year. If they're more than 2 pounds off, you need to replace your gauge, which you can get those at the hardware store or order them. And contact your extension office. It's me, I'm a card. And I have some, for those in the area, I have the Rockingham Co-op. I'm working with them, and we're doing some testing dates throughout the summer, starting in June into July. Like mainly they're on Fridays at some of the different co-ops. Just bring it in. Last year I tested 85 canners. I was amazed how many people. Okay, so just some things a few things to talk about, finish up canning. In their high acid foods, the spores won't germinate in a pH with less than 4.6, so your high acid foods. High heat, 240 degrees at sea level for low acid foods. Pressure canner must be used for all low acid foods. Adjust for your altitude and follow your recipe exactly. Unsafe canning methods. You might see these out here, but they are not approved canning methods, okay? Using a pressure canner should hold at least 4 quarts, okay? No canning in Instapots. It's not totally approved yet. They're working on the research on it, but it's not officially approved yet. So pressure cookers, don't can in those. Electric saucepans, open kettle method. I grew up, we did that, but we know that's not a good thing to do anymore. And that's where you heat food up really, really hot, put it in a jar, put a hot lid on it, and let it set. That's not an improved canning method. You don't kill the yeast and molds in it. Microwaves, dishwashers, believe me, I've seen stuff that people can in the dishwasher. Oven canning is not approved. So make sure you stick to the traditional methods, and you'll be fine. You'll be fine. Okay, a little bit on jams and jellies, one of my favorite things. If you want to start out with food preservation, I suggest starting out with jams and jellies because they're really easy to do and they're lots of fun. So you make jams and jellies. There's 3 ingredients that you need to have: fruit, pectin, or boric acid, and sugar. Okay, sugar is needed in jams and jellies because it's a preservative. It binds up the water so the yeast and molds will not spoil it. Okay. Pectin, whether it's natural in the fruit or if you use the powdered stuff or liquid stuff, helps it form the gel. Okay, it's a whole, it helps making your gel. All fruits contain pectin, some contain more than others. And if you're using fully ripe fruit, mix in some unripe fruit for your pectin. Okay. Different things that happens with acid. Sometimes you may get one that won't set. It could be a problem with the acids. If you want to make reduced sugar jelly, use the pectin and the recipes for reduced sugar. Don't go cutting sugar in it, and you're not going to have jelly. You're going to have syrup or something. and it's not going to keep. So don't go cutting it. Everybody's like, well, that's a lot of sugar. I'm like, but you don't eat the whole jar at one time. You eat a little bit at a time, and it's okay. So if you're going to do reduced sugar, follow a recipe for reduced sugar. Ball Blue Book has some recipes for reduced sugar using different fruit juices and stuff. Okay. So with jams and jellies, what you're doing is you're reducing the water activity. You're binding up that water so it won't spoil. And there is a problem with molds. So when I grew up, I remember putting paraffin on jars. Anybody remember putting paraffin on jars? Yeah, we don't recommend that anymore. How much of that mold went down in your jelly? How much did you have to scrape off, right? So we recommend you water bath your jams and jellies. Usually it's 5 minutes to 10 minutes depending on the recipe, and that will kill all the molds and yeast. Plus, you're sealing that jar. You're keeping all the air out of it so it won't spoil, and it'll keep for a long time. So please water bath your jams and jellies. Pickling. I just want to keep track of my time. Pickling, another fun thing to do. Okay? So we can preserve all kinds of stuff. We preserve things in brine or vinegar. Yeah. So pickle pig's feet, vegetables, fruits. There's all kinds of things to pickle. Okay. So pickling is especially for low acid foods like cucumbers and vegetables. You're going to put them in a brine or vinegar solution, and you're going to change the pH of it. You're going to lower it to that 4.6 or lower, so that you can. That's what helps preserve them. Foods that are properly pickled need to be treated in a boiling water bath canner. Okay, again to make sure you're killing all the molds and yeast, and to get an airtight seal on that jar so it will keep. So these are just some of the things that people might pickle. People do all kinds of pickle stuff. And I was talking to the vinegar people. They're going to Mount Olive to the Pickle Festival in Mount Olive, North Carolina. Oh, that would be cool, where they make all the pickles. So things to remember about pickling. Your level of acidity should not be altered. If it tastes sour, that's okay. If you change the level of acidity or how much vinegar you're using, you're changing the pH of it, and you're making an unsafe product. So you have to keep your pH, keep that level of acidity the same. Don't change the amount of vinegar, okay? I also recommend use canning or pickling salt, okay? Or cheese making salt is the same thing. The reason for that is that a lot of our commercial salts, like regular table salt, has an anti-caking agent in it, and it will cause your pickles to turn dark and your brines to be cloudy. So buy the canning or pickling salt whenever you can. It works best. Don't use homemade vinegars, okay? You want to make sure vinegar is at least 5% acidity, and anything you buy commercially will be that. But don't use that strong cleaning stuff I hear. What is it, 30% cleaning vinegar? Don't use that either. Yeah, I'm sure it works great for cleaning, but not for pickling. Okay? Yeah. Freezing. Just a real brief on freezing. Freezing is great. It extends our shelf life of our food. It's convenient. Everybody's got a freezer and their refrigerator, if nothing else. It's inexpensive and it's easy, but you want to make sure you're doing it good to have a good quality product. Okay? So what does freezing do? It retards the growth of microorganisms. It does not kill them, it just slows them down. Okay? And it also slows down any chemical changes that might affect spoilage. So it does not sterilize the food. Freezing does not kill everything. That's why when you thaw, especially meat, when you thaw meats, you need to thaw them in refrigeration, or else your bacteria is going to grow faster. So make sure it's not a sterilization method. Freezing, one thing, how does freezing affect food? The enzymes, they need to be inactivated. You can take, a lot of people say, well, I just have green beans and I just wash them and snap them and put them in the freezer. I'm like, that's fine. But in 3 months, what's the texture of those green beans going to be? They're going to be kind of mushy because you didn't deactivate the enzymes. And the enzymes kept working and broke down the structure of the cell walls, and it makes things mushy. Okay, so you want to make sure you deactivate your enzymes. In meats, if you keep meats for a long time, you ever had the fat turn kind of rancid? You open a package and you're like, ugh, it smells nasty. That's the freezing will cause the fats to become rancid in your meats if you don't get all the oxygen out. You get texture changes with freezing because of the ice crystals. They break the cell structure. Okay. You rate of freezing, you want to freeze things fast if you can to prevent those ice crystals from forming. Okay. And I suggest you keep your freezers at 0 or colder because you'll keep product longer and you have a better quality product. And if your power goes out, you'll keep your stuff longer too. Okay. And you also want to prevent moisture loss or freezer burn. Freezer burn won't make you sick, it's just gross. And it causes food not to taste good, but it won't make you sick. So, what you got to do is make sure you have good containers for freezing, okay? You can use canning jars for freezing. Just make sure you leave an inch headspace so that you have room for stuff to expand. Make sure they're, again, things that will last. Things that keep odors out. I tell this story when I was in college one summer. I got asked to judge at a county fair, the baked goods section, and I had a lady I knew we were from another county. We went over the mountain to this place. And this lady, there was a lady, bless her heart, who entered like every category of baked goods. And so she baked stuff ahead of time and put it in her freezer. And there was something in her freezer that gave everything an off odor, or off taste. She didn't hardly win anything, and she put all this work in because she didn't have stuff in. There was something in her freezer that was not good, like, I don't know, it might have been green peppers. If you freeze green peppers, you smell them in your freezer. But she didn't wrap things tightly enough, so don't let that happen to you. Okay. So just examples, freezer bags, make sure you use freezer bags, not the storage bags, and the plastic containers or glass jars are great to freeze in. Make sure when you pack it that you cool your food before you put it in your containers. Get as much air out as possible. And if you have a vacuum packager, that's even better because that does get all the air out. And label it, because I'm bad for that. Oh, I know what this is. And you go back later, it's like, what is this? You're not sure what it is. Blanching, that's, again, to blanch vegetables. For freezing, it does work. It's just putting them in submerged in boiling water or steam, and then you immediately put them in ice water to stop the cooking. You don't cook them all the way, and that is what deactivates your enzymes. It also works well for peeling tomatoes and peaches. Okay, you can just pull the skins off and you're not wasting as much. So it works really well for that. Drying. Okay, drying how does drying work? The microorganisms need water to grow, and so you're removing that water to prevent spoilage. They dry them up. Enzymes do slow down. They do continue a little bit, but not as bad. It can change the quality some. What can you dry? All kinds of stuff, okay? Probably why you do this, jerkies is a big one around here. Herbs, vegetables, fruits. And there's different ways to dry. Some things sun dry. Sun drying does not work well in here because there's too much humidity, but out west in the desert, they dry a lot of stuff. With the sun, dehydrators, you can use your oven if it goes low enough to like 140. You can use your oven to dry. And there's all types of dehydrators around. It's whatever you like. Fermentation. Okay, a big one. And beginning more and more popularity is fermentation. So, again, you're changing the food by causing intentional growth of bacteria, yeast, or mold. So when this happens, you make lactic acid, and that is what, like cabbage. When you take that cabbage and you shred it, or cut it and put it in your container, and you beat it and beat it and you beat it till the juices start coming out. Those juices and the bacteria that's naturally on the cabbage will start the fermentation process, and it makes lactic acid, and that is the acid that helps it preserve the food. It also gives a flavor to food. So sauerkraut, we have sauerkraut, fermented dill pickles, kombucha. There's all kinds of stuff people ferment. If you're using crocks, don't use grandma's old crocks because they were treated with a lead glaze. Okay? In fermentation, that lead will leak out. So newer crocks, any crocks should be after 1979 if you're going to use a crock to ferment in. Okay, so I have some newer crocks. I also use a food grade plastic bucket, but make sure it's a food grade plastic bucket. Okay? And the best temperature is 70 to 75 degrees. So if you put it in your basement, that's fine. It's just going to take a little longer, but you don't want it real warm because then it will not ferment and it'll actually spoil. So 70 to 75 is where it works best. Okay, this is just for some more information. This is my contact information. I also have business cards up here. Any questions? Yes.
So, as a retiree, I am leading into growing my own food. And a lot of that is because I feel like a lot of our commercial food is not not healthy. So, for me, in doing preserving my food, I care about the nutrient food. Which one of these is the worst on nutrients, and which is the best?
I mean, freezing is one. I mean, freezing you can pick because first of all, it's how much space you have and what you like. That's where I always start with that. I like canned green beans. I don't like frozen green beans. I like frozen corn. I don't like canned corn. Since what my family will eat. But nutrient-wise, the whole thing with the nutrients also with canning is you gotta make sure you store it in a cool, dark place, okay? Because new colors will leak out with fluorescent lights and glass. So nutrient-wise, we haven't seen a lot of difference in them. And as one of my coworkers says, Campbell's soup was good until you canned it, okay? So if you're gonna can something, you are changing sometimes the texture and what it is like. So that's what we tell people also. If like with salsa, people may make the best homemade salsa, is great, but you go to can it, it's going to change it. Also, it's not safe to do your own salsa recipes. You need to use a tested recipe so you have the proper pH. So nutrient-wise, back to that, we're not seeing a lot of difference in it. It's a lot of it with the canned goods though, I will say you do need to store them in a cool, dark place or your colors. I have jars that have sat in my office for a couple of years and I leave them that way because they were once red tomatoes. They are now gray because of the fluorescent lights.
One follow-up.
Uh-huh.
Someone had told me at one point, and you're an expert, I know nothing, that canning low acid ruins a lot of the nutrients in the canned product. Is that?
No, not really. And the biggest thing when you do can in low acid foods, that juice that you canned it in, use it. Don't pour it off because some of the nutrients are in that. Like the green beans, don't drain that off. Use that nutrients because the nutrients are in there. Yep. Other question? Yes. No, some people do hide canned tomatoes in a pressure canner or peaches. You can do that. It's whatever you like. Yeah. There are some high acid foods you can pressure can. It's whatever you like. Yeah. Ooh, I'd have to look that one up. Freezing eggs. I don't know. I know some people take them and beat them up and freeze them like egg beaters. You know what I mean? Already beaten up. That might be a good way. Get with me. I'd have to research that one because sometimes some people put salt in them. I know. It just depends. But yeah, that's a good question. Anybody who's got enough eggs to freeze right now. That's a good thing to have extra eggs right now, the cost of them. Other questions? So check with your, like I'm in Rockham County, I do offer some classes throughout the summer or throughout the year. Check with Virginia Cooperative Extension. We have all kinds of classes and stuff going on. Plus, how to grow your vegetables. I'm a plug in for my coworkers who work with horticulture and helping you to get your soil tests and all that kind of stuff. Food preservation is great. It's one of those fun things, and what a better way to, like jams and jellies. I make them in the summer. Christmas comes, I'm done. I start handing them out. Or I go to somebody's house for dinner. Here, have some fresh jam. Just stay up on what's in season. Get your equipment ready. Jars, I wanted to say one thing. Make sure you use canning jars, not old spaghetti sauce jars, not old mayonnaise jars. The glass for those. Canning jars are thick enough, I didn't bring them today, but are thick enough to withstand the pressure of a pressure canner. Those other jars, especially over the years, the glass has gotten thinner and thinner. So make sure you use the proper kind of jar. The other thing is, if you're doing tomatoes, canning tomatoes, we ask you, and it's in the publication, the boiling water bath publication, to acidify your tomatoes. And the reason for that is the pH of tomatoes can vary, right? It can vary if it's wet year or dry year, what your soil's like, the variety. We have actually done research, and that heirloom tomatoes are not as acidic as your other, like Rutgers or something like that. So to be safe, to make sure you keep that pH at 4.6 or higher, you use citric acid, or you can use vinegar or lemon juice. And the directions are in the boiling water bath publication. I use citric acid. It takes, I think it's on here, but it's like 1/4 of a teaspoon to a pint. It's not much. No taste, and you make sure your pH is where it needs to be. So make sure you acidify tomatoes, just to be safe. Even if you pressure can, we ask you to acidify the tomatoes. Lids, okay, we'll talk about those a little bit. So these are one-piece lids, one-time use. You only use this lid one time unless you buy the ones that are reusable. Directions for these, you can read the box. You can follow the directions on the box, but I like to heat mine, not boil, okay? Bring the water to a boil, turn it off. Drop your lids in, set it off the burner. You want to warm this rubber just a little bit. If you warm it too much by boiling it, you thin it out and it won't seal, okay? So that's good. Putting your lids on your jar. I should have brought a jar and I didn't want it to break. So when you put your lid, your ring and your lid on your, of course the rings you can use over and over again, just wash them and dry them until they get rusted and dented, and it's time to get new ones. You want to, when you put your ring on your jar, tighten it to finger tight. When it starts getting tight, stop. If you crank it down, how's that air going to get out of that jar to seal it? It's not. I had a brother lost 2 whole canners of green beans because he was He-Man and cranked them down too tight. Air couldn't get out. So just finger tight, because you want the air to get out to cool to form your seal. And then make sure you always, the top of your jars, that you wipe them off really well and there's no food particles, because that's another thing. When you take them out of the canner with these handy dandy grabbers, okay, I like tools. When you take them out of your canner, even boiling water bath, lift them straight up, set them on a towel or cutting board out of a draft, okay? Because a draft, or don't put them on a quartz or granite counter, you'll crack them, okay? When you lift them up though, there'll be water on top of that jar. Leave that on there. If I go tilting my jar to drain it off, I may get food up under the rim of it and that jar may not seal. So it'll evaporate it off, and try to leave your jar sit for 12 hours to make sure they all seal. And do not retighten the rings. That's fine if they come loose, because you want that air to come out. And when you store them without the rings. Wipe them off without the rings. The reason for that is if you have a jar that comes unsealed, you'll be able to tell it. Okay? Because sometimes things do happen after you do that. Any other questions? I'm glad somebody came out today. This is great. So start planting. Get those seed books. If you want to make spaghetti sauce, you want a meaty tomato. You probably all know that, like aroma, a paste, or something like that. So you can can all the other ones, but plan what you want to get good quality stuff. All right, well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Well,